The first shot cracked the dawn like a bone snapping. It echoed once through the valley, sharp and final, and every Marine on the ridgeline knew, this wasn't a warning. This was an execution. Radios screamed to life, boots scrambled in gravel, and the pale blue light of morning revealed the truth too late. 230 Marines were walking straight into a well-laid ambush. Staff Sergeant Mara Rook Calder lay prone on a distant outcrop, her rifle already warm beneath her cheek. She had arrived 3 days earlier with a press badge she never used and orders that were never written down. Officially, she was a contracted Overwatch specialist attached to logistics. Unofficially, she was the quiet insurance no one talked about. As the valley exploded with muzzle flashes and the air filled with the thud of mortars, Rook understood something terrible in a single breath. The convoy was boxed in, the high ground was lost, and she was the only one who could see the whole board. The ambush came from all sides. From the shale slopes to the east, from the scrubbed terraces to the west, and from the narrow goat trail that cut behind the Marines like a knife. The enemy had waited for the moment the sun rose into the eyes of the lead elements, blinding optics and burning away night vision. Rook watched Marines drop to cover that wasn't there, watched a corpsman drag a wounded kid by his vest while rounds chewed the dirt inches from his face. Her finger tightened. She exhaled. The first enemy gunner folded before he could swing his weapon again. She didn't wait for confirmation. She didn't wait for permission. Rook worked the rifle like it was a part of her breathing. Inhale, hold, squeeze, adjust. The ridge went quiet where she touched it. One machine gun, then another. A spotter behind her whispered ranges and wind, his voice thin with strain. Then his whisper cut off mid-syllable, replaced by a sound that no sniper ever forgets, the wet, sudden end of a life inches away. Rook didn't look back. She couldn't. She shifted her position, dragging herself across stone until her elbows bled, and kept firing. Down below, Captain Eli Moreno tried to make sense of chaos. He had 30 seconds of calm in his head and then none at all. Men were pinned. Ammo was burning. The radio to battalion hissed with static. He heard shots from the north, precise, measured, and realized someone was pulling pressure off his flank. He didn't know who. He didn't know how long it would last. But he made a decision that would save lives. Push to the ravine, he shouted. Now. Rook tracked the movement, adjusted her angles, and cursed softly. The enemy was adapting, spreading out, crawling low. They were smart, patient, and they knew the terrain better than she ever would. A round snapped past her ear, close enough to comb her hair. Another smacked stone near her scope, showering her face with grit. She rolled, fired from an awkward angle, and watched a silhouette drop. Her shoulder screamed. Her rifle jammed. For one heart-stopping second, she was just a woman alone on a rock with 230 lives below her and nothing in her hands that worked. She cleared the jam with shaking fingers and laughed once, breathless and wild. Not today, she told the morning. Minutes bled into something that felt like hours. Rook rationed her shots, picked only the targets that mattered, the leaders, the heavy weapons, the runners carrying ammo. When she ran dry on one magazine, she reached for another and found only air. The spotter's pack lay torn and useless. She counted rounds like prayers and spent them carefully. Below, the Marines fought like they always did, together. They moved wounded men on ponchos, shared water, shared fear. A young private named Harlan found himself shaking so badly he couldn't reload until a Lance Corporal grabbed his hands and said, "Look at me. Breathe. We're still here." Harlan nodded and breathed and fired. Somewhere unseen, someone was still covering them, and that knowledge became a thin line of steel in every spine. The enemy surged when they thought the unseen shooter was finished. Rook saw it coming and felt a cold clarity settle over her. This was the moment she had trained for, the one they never promised you'd survive. She shifted to a secondary position she'd marked on her map with a simple star, slid down a chute of stone, and set up again just as the first wave broke cover. She fired until her vision tunneled and her world narrowed to the reticle and the steady pull of the trigger. When the rifle finally clicked empty, she switched to a carbine she hated and used it anyway. When that ran dry, she took a breath, stood up into fire, and threw a smoke grenade toward the ridge line that mattered most. It wasn't enough to stop bullets. It was enough to confuse men. Captain Moreno heard the change, the sudden lull, the shift in enemy fire, and seized it. He called for everything he had. Artillery answered like a god clearing its throat. The valley shook. The enemy broke. By the time help arrived, the sun was high and unforgiving. Helicopters thundered in, rotors whipping dust and smoke into a blinding storm. Medics ran. Guns went quiet. The ambush that should have been a massacre ended as something else, scarred, costly, but alive. They found Rook where the stone rose into a lonely finger of rock. She was sitting with her back against it, rifle across her lap, eyes closed, breathing shallow but steady. Blood streaked her sleeve where shrapnel had kissed her arm. When she opened her eyes, she saw Marines she didn't know staring at her like she was something between a rumor and a miracle. Captain Moreno knelt in front of her. He didn't ask her name. He just said, "You held." Rook nodded once. "You moved," she replied. That mattered. Later, when the count was done and the wounded were lifted away, someone asked how one sniper could make a difference against an ambush that big. Moreno looked out over the valley, now quiet and ordinary again, and answered without thinking. "Because she didn't fight alone," he said. "She gave us time. We used it." Rook left before sunset, as she always did. No ceremony. No photographs. Just a woman walking away from a place that would remember her even if it never learned her name. As the Marines cleaned weapons and wrote letters home, a story took root among them, not about a perfect shot or an impossible stand, but about what happens when one person refuses to break and 100 others choose to stand with that refusal. The message stayed with them long after the dust settled. Courage isn't loud, and it isn't always seen. Sometimes it's a single figure on a rock at dawn, fighting alone so others don't have to, and trusting that when the moment comes, they will move.